So why was Arras important?
Arras?
Arras.
Arras. Yeah. Well, it was a centre of a lot of military work, and the Canadians who eventually fought at Vimy Ridge, and you know what an important place that is, they started out moving out of bunkers in Arras, underground bunkers. So there are many, many, many historical battle stories around that old town.
You often talk about Canadian identity as being forged in the First World War.
Yes. Now,
Can you elaborate? What do you mean our identity was formed? I mean, it's hard enough to find a Canadian identity, so what do you mean?
well, of course, I'm an immigrant, so I'm searching desperately for what it is to be a Canadian. I mean, we're all immigrants, of course, in many ways, but I'm just a first-generation immigrant. Mm-hmm. So I'm always trying to learn what it means. What is Canadian history? And, of course, I've done a lot of reading, a lot of studying, and how the Canadian troops from across Canada were pulled together to actually fight in the First World War in northern France. It was really the first coming together of groups of soldiers from across our great land. And so in that sense, it has been described as an identity formation for Canada. Now, you know, this is a long time ago. Because we are a nation of continual immigration, we forget our stories. Mm-hmm. So I've had to learn them. Mm-hmm. I'm still learning. One can never know enough about our history and world history now.
Mm-hmm. And of course, you're doing the journey in 2014, which is the 100th anniversary?
100th anniversary of the beginning of the First World War. So I've made 3 journeys now to 3 Elizabeth MacElroy Memorial Journeys for myself. And this will be the 4th where I'm inviting people to come with me.
Do you want to talk a bit about, like, where does your journey start?
Oh.
Where does your journey start? Where are you going to be?
Okay.
And where do you lead people? Where are you going to be guiding people through? And how does that connect with the war? And
well, we're going to start in England, in London. We'll have just a couple of days there. Of course, we'll go to the British Imperial War Museum. The night before we leave London, we will go for a river cruise on the River Thames and experience something of old England. Then we'll take our own vehicle down to Portsmouth, and we will see Eisenhower's planning office, and that, of course, is for the Second World War. And we will get on a ferry. We will travel overnight, just as the Second World War troops travelled for the D-Day landings. And we will land as the D-Day warriors landed. That is very, very moving. And then we will explore some of that area, but then quite quickly move up to Picardy and Flanders Fields and the great memorial sites of the First World War. Of course, we'll be going to Vimy Memorial, the incredible Vimy Memorial, Passchendaele and Memorial. And then we'll be taking the ferry from Dieppe across the English Channel to New Haven. That is how most of the troops who were wounded were taken back to England, those who survived. And
that was their journey back.
That was their journey back. And of course, I'm very interested in the beginnings of psychiatric and psychological understandings of the trauma of warfare. It's really when the beginning work was done by some of the great pioneers in the field. So that's interesting to me. But in New Haven is in the county of Sussex, and that is my personal home, my mother's home county. The last 2 days we shall spend in a 500-year-old inn, experiencing as much as we can old village life in England. Some people will have seen War Horse, and they will have seen what village life could have been like before the First World War. It's a wonderful place to stay. It's quite it's quite wonderful to stay in a very, very old place. I've been finding some of the fields in which Canadian troops actually camped before they went over for the terrible Dieppe debacle in the Second World War. It's taken me a long time to find these fields. I have to keep going around into old churches and looking at anything new that they've published for their church bulletins. So I have found some places. And of course, Dieppe was a terrible place for Canadians. The casualty rate was maybe 76% or something, just unbearable. So really to honor all people who fought. And of course the German troops suffered terribly as well. So we will be also going into some of the German cemeteries. And in our last night, we are going to have a feast, and I've invited a guest to join us who is also interested in these things. I'm not going to tell you his name. You'll have to come on the trip and find out.
Stay on the trip the whole time.
Yes, he is also interested in these matters. Is married to a German, as indeed many of my family have very strong German connections. So these are old wounds that we're all exploring, and family, history, our ancestors. It's really quite a pilgrimage.